On the night of March 27, 1999, during the opening days of the Kosovo War, a sleek black aircraft sliced through the darkness over Serbia. It was the pride of American air power, the so-called invisible jet, the Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk. For years, it had carried an almost mythical reputation. Born in secrecy during the Cold War, revealed to the public only in the late 1980s, and proven in combat during the Gulf War, the F-117 had come to symbolize technological supremacy. It was not fast, it was not agile, it did not carry heavy air-to-air weapons. But it possessed something far more powerful: stealth. Designed with faceted surfaces to scatter radar waves and coated with radar-absorbent material, it was engineered to slip through enemy air defenses like a ghost. For years, many believed it was nearly untouchable. Stealth, however, was never invisibility. It was reduction, a shrinking of radar cross-section, a manipulation of physics, a calculated deception. Radar systems emit radio waves that bounce off objects and return to the receiver. Traditional aircraft reflect strong signals, appearing clearly on radar screens. The F-117's unusual diamond-like geometry scattered those waves away from the source, drastically reducing its signature. Combined with careful route planning, electronic warfare support, and suppression of enemy air defenses, the Nighthawk became the spearhead of high-risk strike missions. It would strike command bunkers, air defense nodes, and strategic infrastructure in the opening hours of conflict, paving the way for less stealthy aircraft to follow. When NATO launched Operation Allied Force against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia in March 1999, the F-117 was once again called into action. Serbian air defenses were considered formidable, consisting of Soviet-era surface-to-air missile systems such as the S-125 Niva, known in NATO terminology as the SAW 3 inches Goa. Though not cutting-edge by Western standards, these systems were integrated into a layered network of radars and missile batteries. Still, NATO planners believed that stealth aircraft could penetrate with relative safety. After all, the F-117 had flown hundreds of sorties over Iraq in 1991 without a single combat loss. But the Serbs were not passive targets. Under the command of Colonel Zoltan Dani, a disciplined and adaptable officer, elements of the 250th Air Defense Missile Brigade studied NATO tactics carefully. They understood that they could not rely on brute technological superiority. Instead, they would rely on patience, discipline, and creativity. Dani's unit operated the aging S-125 system, a platform first introduced in the 1960s. On paper, it stood little chance against modern stealth aircraft. Yet warfare is rarely decided on paper. As NATO aircraft struck targets nightly, Serbian radar operators observed patterns. Stealth jets often used similar corridors. They minimized radio transmissions. They depended on speed and precision. Crucially, stealth technology was optimized against higher frequency radar bands commonly used for targeting. Lower frequency radars, while less precise, could sometimes detect anomalies, faint, fleeting returns suggesting something unusual in the sky. These returns were weak and inconsistent, but they hinted at possibility. On that March night, Lieutenant Colonel Dale Zelko piloted his F-117 on a strike mission toward Belgrade. The mission profile was routine: ingress at medium altitude, bomb release on a designated target, and egress along a planned route. Weather conditions were mixed, with cloud cover that could complicate both visual identification and infrared detection. Unknown to Zelko, Serbian forces had adjusted their tactics. Radar systems were activated only briefly, sometimes for mere seconds, to avoid detection by NATO's anti-radiation missiles. The goal was simple: remain unpredictable and survive long enough to take a shot. Around 8:15 p.m. local time, Dani's battery detected something unusual. Using modified radar settings and perhaps aided by open bomb bay doors that momentarily increased radar reflectivity, operators tracked a faint return. It was not a bright, stable target, more like a whisper than a shout. But it was enough. Dani made a decision that would soon echo across the world. He ordered missiles prepared. The S-125 system fired 2 missiles into the night sky. These were not precision-guided weapons by modern standards. They relied on radar guidance and proximity fuses. For a few tense seconds, nothing was certain. Then, high above the Serbian countryside, a flash tore through the darkness. One missile detonated close enough to cripple the F-117. Shrapnel ripped into the aircraft. Systems failed. The once untouchable Nighthawk was mortally wounded. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared. Zelko fought to maintain control, but the aircraft was no longer flyable. He made the only decision possible: eject. The canopy blew, the seat fired, and he was thrust into the cold night air as the black jet tumbled downward. Moments later, the F-117 crashed into a field near the village of Budanovci. For the first time in history, a stealth aircraft had been shot down in combat. The event shattered assumptions. Images of the wreckage, with its distinctive angular panels scattered across farmland, spread rapidly. Serbian civilians posed with fragments of the aircraft. Western analysts scrambled to understand what had gone wrong. How could a decades-old missile system defeat one of the most advanced aircraft ever built? The answer was complex, rooted not in a single flaw but in a convergence of factors: predictable flight paths, disciplined enemy tactics, brief radar activations, and the simple truth that stealth reduces visibility, it does not eliminate it. Meanwhile, Zelko descended by parachute into hostile territory. Alone, in darkness, in enemy land, his survival depended on training and luck. He evaded capture for hours, using a survival radio sparingly to avoid detection. NATO launched a combat search and rescue mission, a high-risk operation involving helicopters and escort aircraft. Eventually, he was recovered safely. The pilot lived, the aircraft did not. The downing of the F-117 did not end NATO's air campaign. Nor did it invalidate stealth technology. But it forced a recalibration. It demonstrated that even the most advanced systems have vulnerabilities. It reminded military planners that adversaries adapt. And it proved that innovation is a continuous contest, a duel between offense and defense that never truly ends. What happened that night was not merely the loss of an aircraft. It was a collision between myth and reality. The Nighthawk had been portrayed as invisible. Serbia showed that invisibility is a relative term. In warfare, absolutes are dangerous illusions. To understand how the Nighthawk was shot down, one must step inside the mindset of those who hunted it. The 250th Air Defense Missile Brigade was not equipped with state-of-the-art digital systems. Its radars were analog. Its missiles were old. Spare parts were scarce. NATO's air forces, by contrast, possessed advanced electronic warfare capabilities, precision munitions, and overwhelming numerical superiority. On paper, the imbalance was stark. But Colonel Danny's approach was methodical. He understood that survival was the first objective. NATO aircraft routinely targeted radar emissions using anti-radiation missiles. Therefore, Serbian crews minimized exposure. Radar sets were powered on only for brief intervals. Sometimes less than 20 seconds. Just enough to scan and possibly lock onto a target before shutting down again. This cat-and-mouse strategy reduced the likelihood of immediate retaliation. Another key factor was adaptation. Danny's unit reportedly modified its radar frequencies and adjusted operating procedures to better detect low observable aircraft. Lower frequency radar waves, while less precise, are less affected by stealth shaping. They cannot provide a detailed targeting solution on their own, but they can indicate the presence of something unusual. In combination with optical spotting and careful prediction of flight corridors, they created windows of opportunity. Stealth aircraft, including the F-117, rely heavily on mission planning. Routes are selected to minimize exposure to known radar sites. However, repeated use of similar paths can create patterns. Serbian defenders observed these patterns over multiple nights. They studied the timing of strikes. They anticipated likely approaches to key targets in and around Belgrade. On March 27, those preparations converged. When Zelko's bomb bay doors opened for weapon release, the aircraft's radar cross-section increased momentarily. Even stealth aircraft cannot avoid physics. Open cavities reflect radar energy. That brief vulnerability may have provided the extra signal needed for missile guidance. The S-125 missiles, once launched, raced toward their target at high speed. Though designed decades earlier, they were still lethal within their engagement envelope. One missile detonated close enough to send fragments tearing through the aircraft's structure. The F-117's design prioritized stealth over aerodynamic grace. Its faceted surfaces were optimized for radar deflection, not for absorbing heavy damage. Once critical systems failed, recovery was impossible. In the aftermath, global reaction was swift. Analysts debated whether stealth had been compromised. Some argued that predictable tactics were to blame. Others suggested that Serbian ingenuity deserved more recognition than Western planners had anticipated. The truth likely lay somewhere in between. For Serbia, the shootdown was a morale victory. For NATO, it was a sobering reminder that technological dominance does not guarantee invulnerability. Yet the broader campaign continued. Stealth aircraft kept flying missions. Air defenses were gradually degraded. The strategic balance did not shift dramatically because of a single loss, but the psychological impact was profound. The wreckage of the F-117 became a symbol. Pieces were displayed publicly. Portions reportedly found their way into museums. The once secret aircraft, designed in the shadows of Cold War laboratories, now lay exposed in a muddy field. And yet, the story did not end in defeat. It evolved into a lesson. The downing of the F-117 was not the end of stealth. In fact, it accelerated its evolution. Engineers studied the incident carefully. They examined radar coverage, flight routes, and engagement timelines. Stealth designs grew more sophisticated. Newer aircraft, such as the Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor and the Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II, incorporated advanced materials, curved surfaces, and integrated electronic warfare systems far beyond what the F-117 possessed. The F-117 itself was eventually retired from active service in 2008, though some airframes have continued limited operations. Its legacy remains significant. It pioneered operational stealth. It proved its effectiveness in multiple conflicts. And, perhaps most importantly, it demonstrated that no system is perfect. Warfare is an endless contest of adaptation. Every shield invites a stronger sword. Every sword inspires a better shield. The events of March 27, 1999, illustrate this dynamic vividly. An aging missile system, operated with discipline and ingenuity, found a fleeting opportunity. A pilot survived through training and courage. A myth was challenged, not destroyed, but refined. How a Nighthawk was shot down is not merely a tale of loss. It is a story about assumptions tested under fire. It is about the limits of technology and the power of human decision-making. It is about how even in an age of advanced engineering, outcomes can hinge on seconds, signals, and split-second judgments. High above Serbia that night, the invisible predator met a patient hunter. The sky flashed, history shifted, and the world was reminded that in war, nothing is truly invisible, only harder to see. The lesson endures. Superiority is never absolute. It must be earned, defended, and constantly reimagined.